It is the final version indeed. The prologue is the first and smallest macro section of the work, which contains only the prelude and the recitative by the happy masked salesman. Not literally that, but something that serves the same purpose if possible. It's not essential to the work, but it will be a good addition for context. It will certainly be detailed in the staging reference tone. The practice of one note per syllable is not always desirable, nor is it common in a lot of opera. The prolongation of syllables throughout more than one tone is called a melisma.
'Twas a starry night. It's been a month. I beg of you, tell me where is my dove? What did you say? Really, I must go. Yes, tell me. What won't he show? Goodbye now. What goodbye? And what will he show?
It's an aesthetic element used as an ornament. It's quite common in several styles of music, and comparatively to most opera, Majora doesn't quite have enough of it. Tonic syllables are indeed expected to match downbeats, but in the occasion that does not happen, it's because there is supposed to be an offbeat accentuation, which is then part of the music. Act 3 has a lot of irregularities and dissonance. This is a clear exception, probably one of the tidiest and cleanest sections of it, in clear 3/4, compared to later sections in which a beat might be impossible to follow. Off the top of my head, I can remember at least in the beginning of Act 2, one viola plays alongside one cello and one flute. I love the viola, and I think there's room for a solo near the end of that same act as well, but the final revisions haven't reached that point yet.
A fellow theatre technician. If I can further assume this means you have some experience of Broadway, then this becomes quite simple. Begin with Les Miserables. Les Mis itself is quite hit and miss to me, and is not opera, but it's enough like opera to qualify as something like opera light, a taste, if you will. Multo will read this and think to ask, that's the literal definition of operetta, why not recommend that instead? To which I'll respond by saying that it is eminently likely you are already familiar with Les Mis, and therefore with something reasonably like opera in general. It is also because operetta, especially English-language operetta like Gilbert and Sullivan, is very like the older comic opera tradition prevalent in Italy and a little less in France, which are indeed facets of the larger tradition, but I am trying to avoid railroading you to the specific before your own taste is allowed to guide you. The gotchas are as follows. Opera is long, nearly never in English, and then often unintelligible in vocal delivery even in the original language and informed by musical aesthetics usually not less than a century old. None of these are especially severe impediments. Listening to most classical music, in fact, has exactly all of these same difficulties, but it remains to be kept in mind, particularly about length. If you've run a musical before, you'd be used to 2 acts of slightly more than an hour each, often the second is shorter, and the whole show is usually done well inside of 3 hours. Some opera is this long, a few are shorter, like the single act of Bartók's A Kexicalu Herceg Vara, and others, like French grand opera, are far longer. Berlioz's Les Troyens is 5 acts of a little over an hour each, and is often performed over 2 evenings. And Wagner is, of course, the infamous subject of Rossini's admonition, having delightful moments, but terrible quarters of an hour. As to actually sitting down and watching opera, most known works have at least some staged performances on film, and these usually make their way to YouTube. Some of these are even subtitled. If you don't know what to listen to, most classical and later composers at least dabbled, and in some cases specialized in opera, so begin perhaps by seeing if any names you know wrote any. Some of the names that often come up with connections to the tastes of the people behind this project are Bartók, Beethoven, Berlioz, Rossini, Verdi, Weber, and Wagner. Once you have a better idea of your tastes, it would behoove you to consider finding, by your preferred means, better quality recordings of performances on, say, DVD, or better yet, actually attending one. I don't know where you live, so I can't tell you how feasible that last is, but at least in the English-speaking world, most cities large enough to boast at least one symphony orchestra stage operas with at least some regularity. Ultimately, as one of my old teachers once said, you can read all you want about music, and you'll still be no wiser than if you'd spent half the time listening instead. The whole overblown, exclusionary cultural baggage swaying from the musical tradition of Western opera is entirely superfluous and certainly nothing to find intimidating. Just listen to music you like listening to, find composers whose works you can fall in love with, and that's really all that's sufficient. Leave the pointless bickering to the generations of music critics in all their graves, and to madmen like Bulto and I.